Hello and welcome to the Heads and Volleys podcast with me, Lee Dunn. So here we are. It is Thursday evening, first real full day of Baltimore 2020 completed, and coming to you with just a little recap of what I saw, what I went through today, the people I spoke with, the experience I had, kind of my thoughts and opinions on things. And the idea is that if you're here, then great, and maybe you had a similar experience or you can share your experiences too. But if you're not here, there's a lot of really good value takeaways from some of these sessions that I saw. Now, the day flew by, it's almost midnight, and it's just been a whirlwind. That there's so many people that you see or that you know from other coaching courses that I've taken or people that I've worked with or collaborated with online. There's just so many people here doing so many great things that it's so difficult to even move between classroom to classroom, even though there's a 30-minute window between each seminar. It takes that long to find the bathroom or to navigate your way through a crowd of people that you know or people that you haven't seen since last year. And I saw a guy earlier that I had just made friends with at the last convention and bumped into him in the hallway again today. So we have an entire year of catch-up to do. So actually getting to sessions on time is quite a struggle around here. But it's been an amazing day. It's just, you can't beat the collaboration and the networking and just being in an environment where everybody is wanting to be the best that they can be, or is wanting to find the best way to press or the best way to defend or the best way to manage their organization or their parents or their players. And it's just a place that everybody really wants to be the best, and I think that's probably the best place that you could ask to be in. So I'll run through some summaries of the sessions that I've been through today. I really hope you find some value in it as I did. I'm mainly giving you my takeaways, so hopefully you have a similar mindset to me, but definitely listen, leave me some feedback. If there's anything that you want to see, perhaps for tomorrow, then let me know too, because I would happily go and attend a session or get some notes or even get some contact for you too. So reach out to me at Lee Dunn Soccer on Twitter. You'll have seen some stuff from today also. I actually interviewed one of the guys who presented earlier, Eric Oman. He was my very first coach instructor. So he led me through the national diploma almost 9 years ago. And so seeing him today, and I keep up in contact with him, and so I was able to grab him and have a recorded chat with him. So I'll release that shortly too. But here we go into today. I will start here with Tim Bradbury. He was on the field and he did a session on the coach's toolkit. And I'll start with a preface that I don't usually go to the field sessions. I'm not looking for placement of cones and X's and O's and moving that way. I'm more of a administration and business side of things. But I had some friends that I was with and they wanted to go to the field, and I didn't really fancy anything that was on the schedule, so I took it. And I'm really glad I did, because Tim he talked about the toolbox, the coach's toolkit, and for a lot of us going through coach education, it tends to be this idea of freeze and correct and recreate and then replay, whereas he identifies for the toolkit, and if you've seen on Twitter, I have the image of all of the toolboxes or the tools in the toolkit that he uses. And so I put it out there for people to see. And the idea is that you can use those. And what he was asking was to track how many times people use it. So a couple of things on there are check and adapt. There's individual reference. There's coaching in the flow. There's natural stoppages, question and think, and then question and answer, demonstration, key phrases, command, freeze, coaching at 4 stoppages, and then group problem solving and collaboration. So what he did is he printed out the sheet, gave it to us, and then just asked us to make a note of how many times he used each tool and then specific notes around that. So it was a simple game. It was I think it was 7v7, and if a player scores, they grab another penny by the side of the goal. So the idea of the orange team was to turn all of their team into blue pennies. So every time a player scores, they get a blue penny. Then the first team to complete their team transition color wins the game. But what I really liked was that he stood and watched, and he let everybody know that he was stood and watching, and that's something that we don't do enough of, we don't observe. And then as he moved into stage 2, he brought the teams together, so there was an orange team and a green team, and he said, you now have this problem, and the problem was that you had to score from a combination, from a two-man combination. Now, as a team of 7, you are going to talk about how you're going to do that, what that may look like, the players that may be involved, the areas of the field that you may do that. So he gave them, I think it was about a minute. He had the microphone in there so you could kind of hear their conversation. They were a little shy. And then put them back in the game. So they've had a chance to identify the problem. They've almost kind of seen or have an idea of what their answer may be, and then they go and play. Then once one team had scored from that combination, he then introduced a new challenge for that team. So the team that had scored from a 2-man combination, they then had to get 3 passes in the game. And the other team, the yellow team, or the green team, sorry, that were still trying to find a 2-man combination, remained focusing on that until they scored a goal too. So it was really simple in the setup, and the idea was to present a game that enabled him to use these multiple tools. So there were times where he would be on the field talking with an individual player about a decision they made, or asking them why they were doing things in certain ways, or what they think they could do a little differently. He then used the collective freeze moment, which we all know and we all love, where we freeze everyone and everybody still moves, and then they still move when you say stand still. And then you say go back to where you were, and nobody goes back to the right spot. I mean, you've taken a still, right, of when you said freeze and then what it looks like afterwards. But he did that, and then so he pulls the players together. Then he uses questions. He uses those natural stoppages where that ball goes out of play, or there's a reset moment and it's an opportunity to talk to a player or to a team. Then he used a lot of coaching in the flow, which I thought he did really well. And I'm beginning to do more of this, and it's more a case of, for me especially, coaching in the flow away from the game. So really asking that center back where they could be on the field, what they're doing right now, when the ball is in the attacking half, because they may be too far, they may be too high, whatever the situation is. But I tend to find coaching in the flow is really successful for those players that are not so much around the ball. Then he made a really good point, and to summarize the session, and it was quite a complex session to summarize in a 5-minute ramble here, but he mentioned to try and solve the problems with the ball moving. And I think that's a really valuable takeaway, to try and solve the problems with the ball moving. So give them the ideas or the solutions, give them some guidance, give them some answers, give them a chance to talk about it collectively before they go back on the field. Maybe give them the information before practice, so when they get there, they already have an idea of what they're looking for, and then we can really try and solve these problems with the ball moving, because the ball moves in the game, and that's where the problems are coming from, and that's what we're recreating. So that was a really nice takeaway by Tim there. Then on to Eric Oman, the guy I mentioned, and Neil Hull. They both presented a collaboration. I missed the field session because it clashed with another session I was in, but I caught the classroom wrap-up, and it was all about using technology in your practices, in your feedback, in your relationship with your players. And I witnessed that the session had ran, it was filmed, and then live during the session, they were taking clips from an iPad and showing players in the flow of the game, which I thought was a really interesting approach. And if you have a player that you can have record, or a parent, or even an assistant coach, for example, they are able to film this session going on, and then you can ask a player, and they call it a hot review and a cold review. So the hot review is something has just happened, there's a natural stoppage, there's a natural restart, and a player that was significantly involved within your topic, within whatever you are looking to achieve from your session, you will grab them and just say, what did you see? Why did you do that? What do you think? Then they give you, and that's why it's called a hot review, because it's hot. It's right there. It just happened. What did you see? Maybe they did something well. Maybe they did something not so well. But perhaps you saw something, or you even are just genuinely interested in what they saw, because we don't see everything from our positioning. Then you take a cold review, which is to then show them the video of what they did in that moment that you asked them about, and then ask them if their opinion is different, if they've seen something different. And I really like the idea of having these two moments that are the same but so different. And it's not a test for the player, it's what did you genuinely see, and now what do you see in another method? So I can now use video more successfully with you, or at least I think this is what I plan to do with my players, is to say, what did you do there? What did you see there? And then send them the video, because I film with VO and I have 80 minutes of footage from every game, and sometimes we play 2 games in a weekend. Now, that's 160 minutes from a weekend of games of footage. What am I doing with 160 minutes of footage? For the most part, my boys, they like to see goals. They ask me, hey, coach, send me the video of me scoring a banger. Send me a video of me slide tackling that kid. That's the stuff they want to see. But then if I have specifics from within the game model and the microcycle, then I'm able to say, what were you doing here? What did you think there? And now my coaching is very specific too, and it's very relative. We've worked on these certain aspects for the last week, the last 2 weeks, the last 3 weeks. Now I'm asking you constantly, what did you see there? What did you do? Why did you do that? And then give them the video evidence to say kind of, well, what did you really see? Did it really work? So the idea of technology from Eric and Neil is that we're trying to answer the objective we had tried to achieve in the session or in the game. And I think that's really important too. So I talk about going into a game with success in some of my earlier episodes too, of having defined goals for the game. Now, if you can pull those defined goals from the game in multiple second clips, it makes so much sense. And it makes so much sense because the players that we're typically working with, they are familiar with social media, they're familiar with instant gratification. So they watch videos on TikTok. TikTok seconds on videos, they're so quick. Then you look at Instagram stories, it's, I think, seconds. Facebook stories, even though most of them don't really use Facebook, it's still GIFs, it's still memes, it's still seconds of attention, and then they're on to something else. So we need to take that with us and put that into reality for our players, and not just expect them to get to our level and understand how to use email, but to actually appreciate that we are talking to them on their level and they're able to apply it to their own environment and to their own game. Then there was a mention of, as a coach, and reviewing yourself. It's always nice when somebody assesses you and reviews you. At least I believe so. I think it's so valuable to have somebody give you some guidance, or at least ask you questions of what you were doing and why you were doing it. But the idea of wearing a camera like a GoPro, or even, I guess you could even just put a lapel microphone on, and then listen back and review yourself. How many times are you shouting? How many times are you swearing? How many times are you saying the same name, or questioning the same player, or commanding in certain ways? How many times are you doing all of these? How many times are you really happy with what you were doing? Well, how many times do you think you could have done better in certain instances? It's the only way we get better is we reflect, we review, we look to make changes, or we're really happy and satisfied in what we're doing, and then we move on. And part of the conversation with Eric that I had afterwards was about the amount of data that you can collect. As I said, there's 160 minutes. Eric also uses multiple methods of technology up in Seattle, and he uses a thing called Beyond Pulse, and it takes data, and it's a tracking device, and it gets their heart rate and their activity levels and so much. What do you do with that data? What are you qualified to do? What do you know to do with it? And he made a really interesting point about teaching the players to understand their own data, if not anything else. So teaching players, teaching parents to know that the data doesn't lie, that they have been working really hard consistently for X amount of days. Or maybe they can leave a session and look at it and know that they didn't really try that hard, the data says so. So then you are now encouraging players to be accountable for their own actions. So they are working hard, they're not working so hard, they're aware of it, they're in tune with it, they understand. So you teach them to understand the data. So then another issue, if you have this, how do you teach them to understand the data? What are they looking for? What are the main takeaways? And then to be able to use that to take it into their other environments. He talked in his speech about working with their academy players from the Puget Sound Premier League. So they get together once a month. So those players are coming together once a month. They have multiple other sports, other clubs, other teams, high school, whatever else they're doing. So then how are you helping them to use that information so that they can have a successful home environment as well as the environment that when they come to you? He talked about a tournament that he went to where turned out all of his players hit a wall halfway through the second game before he had this app. And then afterwards, just in simple question and answer, he realizes that these players have been playing in multiple tournaments all summer, and then they come to him supposedly fresh and they're all dead. So if you're able to have a conversation, I think we all should have this conversation if we have players in other environments with other coaches, in terms of just managing their workloads and understanding how hard they're working, at least from a perspective where I can say, you've worked really hard at basketball. If your basketball coach doesn't want to listen and he still wants to push you, I'm going to ask you what you were doing, or at least I can see your data if I have it. And then I'm going to adjust your workload, because I'm caring about you as a future athlete and as a growing person, and not just as a performer right now. So I think that's a really interesting takeaway. Then they talked about using Coach's Eye with the iPad or an iPhone, and the really interesting point that you don't need all this fancy gear. Your cell phone has everything that you can need. Coach's Eye, it's free, or it's a couple bucks, I think, on the App Store. Download it, you can video, and then give it to someone straight away. They can annotate it, they can clip it, they can draw an arrow and say, this is what I saw, this is where I thought the player was going to run, or this is where I thought the ball should go. Now you suddenly see this from a whole new perspective. Instead of asking why he gave the ball away, now he's showing you what he was thinking, and maybe it wasn't even his fault. Perhaps it was the run, or perhaps it was a missed timing. But there's so much more that you see from using this data. So it was a really interesting session with Eric and Neil, and I think it was a really valuable takeaway from them that everyone can use technology. Everyone's trying to use technology, but you don't need to have these fancy cameras and this tracking software for your players to have any success with software or with technology. So there are a couple of big takeaways. Biggest thing is to know your audience. Whatever you're doing with your players, know your audience. Know that if you're coaching 12 and 13-year-olds, they care about TikTok videos. They care about 4 seconds, 5 seconds at most. Now we've got to give them that. If you're looking at novice or amateur, younger beginner players, the level of detail that they need may be much simpler, and they may actually need different data. They may not need to see themselves failing. They may need to see somebody else doing it really well. So who better to show the Maradona to than a video of Maradona doing the Maradona? So it's all relative. Then we look at older players or more experienced players, how they may need other types of video or certain specific breakdowns for them. And then I'll finish it with the fact that this is all going to affect confidence levels. That if you are showing a player what they did wrong consistently, that's soon going to become a red flag for them when they know there's a video or when they know there's a review session coming. But if they get told how well they did in certain moments or certain parts, or even just with a skill, even if they may have messed up for the rest, if they have done something good, they see something good, they're encouraged, they're positive, and especially with those younger beginner ages that are still trying to find their feet, I don't see why you wouldn't be giving them the positive stuff. So that's a really interesting spin on it, that yes, we have this data and this technology to help us review it, but why not actually, as the book says, catch them being good? And they talk about doing that at even the professional level, that a professional player, imagine how good it feels, or everybody knows how good it feels when someone says, that was a good job, well done, nice play, whatever the compliment is. But in this situation, like, good job. And we all feel like $1 million after that. And then I stopped in at a little social with Mr. Dan Abrahams, and I don't know if sharing the notes from it are going to even do it justice, because if you listen to his Sports Psych Show podcast, or if you've ever had the chance to see him talk, you're completely enamored by the words that he's saying, that it's so difficult to take notes that even make sense. And I'm so blown away by even just the beginning of the presentation, where he talks about the four-corner model. Of course, he comes from the UK, so he's familiar with this traditional model of technical, tactical in one corner. Then we have psychosocial in another. Then we have physical in another, and then social in the other. So we have these four corners, and he actually says, I don't think that is correct. And he says that everything should start with the psychological component first. And the psychological component feeds into everything. So starting with psych. Talks about with an individual and how this all fits within that four-corner model of saying with an individual, we need to look at their motivation, their mindset, and their personality. Then goes into the group. What is the leadership of the team or the group? What is the teamship? And then the relationships within the group. And then the environment. So it wants to know what is the environment that's being created? What is it that the players are walking into every time they come to a field or a training session with you? Is it a psychologically informed environment? Is it a place that suits those players? Then to go back to Neil and Eric's session, they talk about how recording yourself and listening and finding. And Dan mentioned a really interesting point that insistence equals resistance. So if in your environment you are consistently insisting on things that the ball should be played a certain way or it should be done in a certain speed or anything like that, that is soon leading to resistance. Resistance, the players don't like it, the players don't want to do it. Now suddenly the model that we had created and the success we were having might not actually be happening further down the road. Then to summarize a little further, talk about he uses a scale. So on a simple level of connecting with a player, and I say simple because it's a simple understanding, but it's far from simple because people are, and he talks about this, people are so complex. It's so difficult to truly understand someone without any skill of actually understanding what they're telling you. But he talks about how we are looking at players that may have an issue. You're probably familiar with a player that has had their ability just seems to have dropped off the face of the earth. They seem to have regressed significantly. Now he talks about using a scale, 1 to 10. Like, how are you doing right now? So the player's low on confidence. Their head's down all the time. They keep miscontrolling the ball. How are you feeling right now? And the example he gave was, oh, you're at a 4. So my instant thought was, it's kind of low. But he goes the other way and he says, wow, 4. Why is it so high? Why is that? It's higher than a 2. It's higher than a 1 significantly. It's higher than a 3. So why is it a 4? And then the questions that help you get even further are, what does 5 look like? What does 6 look like? And then that goes further on to asking our players to have this mindset over the need to perform, that if we can give them, he calls it a 10 out of 10 HPM, which is 10 out of 10 for high performance mindset. So he has a sliding scale, 1 to 10. He lists 2 of them. The one on the left, if you were looking at the image, the one on the left is performance. So people that are performance orientated know that they need to be at an 8, a 9, a 10. Anything below that is not acceptable. It's not good enough. But that leads to all sorts of anxiety. That leads to the fear. And as he mentioned in his talk, I need to perform, I need to perform, I need to perform, I need to perform, I need to perform. But then if you look at the right list of 1 through 10, you ask the players, the individuals, what does a high performance mindset look like for you? Where are those numbers? 8, 9, 10. Okay, so if you can have that mindset, and I'll give a huge shout out to Coach Colton on this because he and I had a conversation on a previous podcast, and I'll link it in the notes, of what that looks like for an individual knowing that they gave their best. And this is very much what Dan Abrahams was touching on today too, that if you can say that you have this high performance mentality, that you are this mindset, high performance mind, 10 out of 10 HPM, then your performance, it may be a 6, it may be a 7, but your mindset is consistently high. Now he leads that into this game face. He talks about developing a game face with everybody. Now, you create a game face. What does that look like? What does your best performance look like? what are you, an animal? What are the words? And he used determined and driven and big, powerful words like control and all these fantastic words that players that he's worked with are creating this mantra. And he talked about Brooks Koepka, how he is tall and he is strong when he walks onto the tee. So now if he's all of these great things, his high performance mindset will lead to a stronger performance because he's focused on his controllables, he's focused on himself, he's focused on his body position, he's focused on the way he's talking to himself. And that if he is in an instance where somebody is talking to him, imagine being in a high performance environment where fans may be shouting at you, or an opponent, you think about combat sports where an opponent may be shouting at you or trying to put you off. Well, you have this control and this mindset that says, I'm going to compete at an 8 or a 9 or a 10 or a 10 out of 10 HPM. Now, the rest of my performance I am working on and I'm training on also, but this is my mindset that's going to allow me to achieve. It's going to allow me to succeed. It's going to be the difference maker. And this is all encompassing into why he says that you can put the psychological component first. You can challenge these players to be the best that they can be, but if the mindset isn't there, they're not going to. The benefit of the training may all go to pot when our wonderful youth soccer world is putting us in tournaments and playing 4 or 5 games over 2 or 3 days, or state cup that you have to win at 10 years old because that's how you're judged for success. So we might as well start training these players to be better understanding of the environments they're playing in, as well as how they can understand themselves and their own environment and their own mindset for them to be able to actually go and get themselves in a performance and perform well on a field. So I've done no justice to that for Dan Abrahams, and I'll have more information coming from him pretty soon too, but it's a fantastic listen. So anytime you can get onto his podcast, he references his podcast constantly in his presentations. So if you want to feel like you were there, listen to the Sports Psych Show. He just released episode 71, and he talked a lot about that too. And it's on my listen list. So do yourself a favor, get onto the Sports Psych Show with Dan Abrahams. And then the last session I'll cover from today is the Business of Club Management with Andrew Donnery and Dr. Matthew Robinson. They both run the Director of Coaching course and the Master Coach Diploma from the United Soccer Coaches. And I actually worked for Andrew for a couple of years whilst I was with him in Elk Grove in California. I learned so much, and the sessions that he runs are so valuable because he says it how it is. They talk about the Master Coach Diploma and how it encompasses a UEFA C license out of Scotland now, because he believes that the education system of UEFA is much better than US soccer. And some people kind of scoff at it, and then he says, am I wrong? And whilst I haven't taken a UEFA license, I know that UEFA is significantly held in high regard. So I think we can understand where he's coming from. But I really want to kind of, the idea of business of club management, he talks a lot about the way that individuals or people are running the club. He criticizes the idea of a 24-hour non-communication rule. Gives the example of if you go into Apple and you buy an iPhone and then you go back because you're not quite sure what you're doing or you need some help, they say, oh, yeah, you can't come back. No, you can't talk to us for 24 hours. It's tongue-in-cheek, but it's pretty accurate that you are selling a product, you have customers, and then you tell those customers that they can't take from you, they can't take anything else from you, they can't ask anything else of you, but they paid for a service. So then talks about how many of us are actually providing a customer experience when players are told what to wear, when to be there, who their coach is. So he talks about with Elk Grove how they've slightly adjusted the landscape there and are offering out a program that fits you. How many days a week do you want to train? How often do you want to be on our field? And then your subscription to the organization will fit within a certain model of the club, and then that will be the model and the track of the club that you follow. if you want to be a player that's a 10,000 hour player and is trying to be a professional and wants to go to college, then there's a track for you. If you are just a kid that likes to have a bit of fun and just wants to go and play with their friends, then there's also a track for you there. And then for everybody in the middle too. So really understanding that you are running a business and the people that you are surrounded by and the product that you are offering. He touched on coaches, and I didn't get to see his afternoon session because I was in another one, but talking about the hiring and development of staff. You have a coach that is in really high regard. You may be stuck to get them out of your organization if you wanted to, but how do you really love the coaches that are in your organization when you're asking them to do stuff, but are you asking them fairly? Are you challenging them? Are you developing them? Are you giving them a chance to give their opinions or their speech? And I think he runs a really open office with his staff. And elite soccer coach Dan James, he is on there too. He's on the board. He's in the organization. And he talks about having ideas and running programs, and everything is based around the benefit of growing the game. So Andrew gave a little snippet of his program that he's running with a charter school where all of the kids also play soccer in the charter school. They are training from 7:45 to 9 a.m. 4 days a week in the morning. Then they train in the afternoon at 3 o'clock and they're done by 5 o'clock. How many of us can offer that? It's incredible how that's kids training 7 hours. So basically, on a standard track in the US, a kid is getting between 2,000 and 4,000 hours of play. If you believe in the 10,000 hours with Gladwell, which is kind of inflated, it's kind of taken out of proportion. There's plenty been written about it. But if that's going to be our standard, at least getting near 10,000 hours, and you may argue that 6,000 hours is correct, but even if we're still only getting kids to 3,000 hours based on a common track of 2 trainings or 3 trainings with multiple weeks off, then how are we going to achieve? How are we going to get these players, which we're all trying to develop players? Now, how are we getting these players to the national team? How are we putting US soccer on the map? Well, the current track, we're just not. So then you put a coach in a school like that, where the kids are playing with their friends in a school environment that they study with all day. They're playing 7 times with additional sessions for strength and conditioning and for yoga. Some people may say it's too much. Some people say it's not enough. It's ultimately getting multiple hours on the field every week for these players to learn. And we talk about experiential learning all the time. And if you can go to an organization and you take that on, then you speak to the membership and say, this is what we offer. We believe in player development. We believe in developing elite talent. Well, here's the proof. Because a lot of us and a lot of organizations, I don't think, have the ability to do so. So he offers a really interesting perspective on taking a second look at your organization and really understanding who they are, what they have, what they need from you, what your product is, because it is a product. Soccer is a business. We're all making money off it. We're all involved in the game. We're all doing it for lots of reasons, as well as the fact that we just love the game and maybe we played. So it was really interesting from Andrew. And if you can get onto any of his courses, you take the Director of Coaching Diploma or even the Master Coach, it just ask questions and listen and just absorb the understanding that he has of his own business and of his environment. Here's the one that I'll mention, the last thing I'll mention on it. They have a $10,000 bonus reward. So if you join his organization at U6 and then you go with the organization all the way through U18 and go on from there, you are eligible for $10,000 prize. The prize goes to the player that leaves the organization and goes to the highest place, the highest college, the highest MLS team, whatever it is. So the player that goes the furthest, having played in the organization from U6 through U18, receives $10,000 as a bonus, as a prize, as part of their tuition, as a well-wish, as for them moving on, for them sticking with the organization. $10,000 seems like a lot. But if you are charging even, let's say, the people here that are probably charging $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a year, and I know how you all feel about the pay-to-play model, but even if you're charging $1,000 a year, then you've made that money from that family alone in 10 years, and you have 3 years left. So now your player has already paid for themselves, and you're able to give back to them. And maybe at 13 or 14 years old, where they may consider moving on to someone else or to another organization, that might just be something that helps keep them around. If you've managed to slip up and you need a chance to get them back on track or get your coach in a good place, now you've really got something to keep them hooked. So interesting perspective. It's take it or leave it with Andrew. I think it's excellent. I loved working for him. It was time for me to move on to a new area that worked for me. And I would probably still be working for him if I was in there. So if you can, get into any of his classes. So there's my little wrap up from today. I think that even just in a 35-minute ramble there's so much. And I'm really happy to be doing this because it challenges me to take in more notes. It challenges me to try and understand things a little bit more. And aside from being completely overwhelmed by Dan Abrahams, I really hope that you've got something out of this. So tweet me and let me know what you got out of it. If you're not here and you were able to just take a couple of little snippets of information away, then please let me know at Lead on Soccer on Twitter. So I'll come again to you on Friday. I'll present more of what I've seen. I've got a busy day ahead, so I'm really excited to share what I get from that, and more coming real soon. Thanks, everyone.